Dear viewers, please let us know where you are watching from and which region or country you are in. Please like this video, watch it until the end, and subscribe to our channel.
Please, my child is hungry. The maid begged, and then the fiancé struck her, and the millionaire rose from his seat. She whispered 5 words to the wrong person, and by the end of that evening, her life would never be the same. No one in this mansion knew her name. No one cared that her son hadn't eaten in 2 days. She wasn't supposed to speak until spoken to. She wasn't supposed to want anything. But that evening, a voice made her brave, and that bravery cost her a slap in the face in front of everyone. What happened in the next 60 seconds shocked the entire house, and no one saw it coming. Hello, friend. Glad to see you again. If you are here for the first time, this channel is dedicated to real, raw, emotional stories, the kind that stay with you long after the video ends. Let us know in the comments what country you are watching from right now. We always love seeing where you all tune in from. Today's story will break your heart, and then put it back together in a way you won't expect. So stick with us until the very end. Laura Barnes had long understood that some kitchens are colder than others, no matter how much heat the ovens put out. She stood in the marble kitchen of the Sinclair estate at 6 in the morning, tying her apron behind her back, the way her grandmother had taught her, the way her grandmother had once been taught by her own mother. 3 generations of Barnes women had walked through the servants' entrance of this house. This year marked exactly 35 years since Laura's grandmother, Agatha, first knocked on that back door looking for work and a shred of dignity. 35 years. The Sinclair family had changed hands twice in that time. New faces, new money, new rules. But the Barneses remained, quietly keeping the house afloat while the world outside changed without them. Laura was 27 years old. She had tired eyes that still held a spark of something soft, something life hadn't managed to beat out of her no matter how hard it tried. She had a gap in her smile that she rarely used, and hands that had scrubbed more floors than she could count. She wasn't bitter about her life at all. She just didn't have the time to be anything other than exhausted. Her son, Danny, was 5 years old, all elbows, knees, and questions. He loved dinosaurs and drew spaceships on the back of old receipts. For him, she got up every morning. For him, she swallowed her pride at that same back door, year after year. His father had died a year and a half ago, a construction accident that the company called an unfortunate alignment of circumstances, paying them off with a settlement that was too little and paperwork that was too much. Since then, it was just the 2 of them in a small rented house on the outskirts of town, a house where the roof leaked in heavy rain, and the refrigerator hummed too loudly and held too little. This week had been especially hard. The rent was due, the car had broken down again, and 2 days ago, the last of the groceries ran out. Laura never told anyone at the estate about this. She never complained. You don't bring your troubles to work, especially when your job depends on being invisible, quick, and grateful. That was the unspoken rule that had governed her family's service in this house for nearly half a century. Be present, be silent, be grateful. But that morning, slicing fruit for a breakfast, she wasn't allowed to touch herself. Her hands trembled slightly. She had left Danny at home with a neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Higgins, who watched him for less money than daycare charged. Before leaving, Danny had tugged at her sleeve and asked in that quiet little voice that broke her heart every time, "Mom, will we have breakfast today?" She smiled and said, "Yes, sweetie, of course." And then she walked 3 blocks to the bus stop with a knot in her stomach because she knew they wouldn't. The Sinclair estate rose above the Hudson Valley hills like something out of an old photograph. White columns, wide verandas, and gardens tended year-round by 4 gardeners. Maxwell Sinclair, the master of the house, was 28 years old, a man who inherited the estate along with a shipping empire from his father, but over the last decade had quietly turned it into something twice as large. In the city, people spoke of him as a fair man, if somewhat aloof. He paid the staff on time, remembered their names, And once, when Laura's mother got sick, he personally arranged for a doctor to visit her. He didn't parade his kindness. He just did it and moved on, as if it were a given and not worth a second thought. The same could not be said of the woman who was soon to become the new mistress of the house. Victoria Kensington was 21 years old, blonde with sharp cheekbones, beautiful with that specific beauty that money polishes in a person until they shine like an exhibit behind museum glass. You admire it, but you never feel warm under that gaze. She had been engaged to Maxwell for 6 months, and in that time, she had managed to make it clear to every member of the domestic staff exactly where their place was in her eyes. Beneath her, and they'd better remember it. She wasn't theatrically or dramatically cruel. It was smaller than that. She never said please or thank you. She left a mess behind for others without even glancing in their direction, as if the person who would clean it up didn't exist as a human being. Once, in front of 3 other employees, she told the head housekeeper that people like them should simply be grateful for the opportunity to serve in such a respectable home. Laura had learned to stay out of Victoria's way, just as one learns to stay out of the way of a summer thunderstorm. You don't argue with it, you just wait it out. But today, waiting it out wasn't an option. Today was the day of the engagement luncheon, a grand reception Maxwell was hosting to officially announce his marriage to Victoria to the wealthiest families in the state. The entire staff had been preparing for a week. Laura had worked a double shift the day before, and another one lay ahead today, which meant one thing. She wouldn't get her paycheck until next Friday. Rent was due tomorrow. The shelves at home were empty, and her son was hungry. She had asked her manager for an advance 2 days ago, and was politely refused. Company policy, they told her. Nothing personal. She understood. She always understood, but understanding had never yet filled an empty stomach. As she carried a silver tray of pastries to the veranda where the guests were gathering, she noticed Victoria by the window, in a pale blue dress, laughing at someone's joke. A glass of champagne dangling from her fingers, as if it weighed nothing. Laura's stomach twisted. This time, not from hunger, but from the unbearable, humiliating weight of what she was about to do. She was going to ask. She didn't want to. Every instinct she had screamed against it, but she remembered Danny's quiet voice that morning, and something in her chest hardened into resolve. Just in advance. Just enough for groceries. She would ask quietly, respectfully, when no one was listening. Surely the woman who was about to become the mistress of this house, a woman with money Laura couldn't even dream of, would find a moment of mercy for someone in need. She set the tray on a side table, straightened her apron, and walked over to the window where Victoria stood. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "could I have a word with you? In private." Victoria turned around, gracefully arching an eyebrow. "It will only take a minute," Laura said. "Please." Something in her tone, in that please, in the way her voice trembled slightly on that short word, made Victoria take a half step closer, involuntarily intrigued. Laura leaned in and lowered her voice to almost a whisper. "My son hasn't really eaten in 2 days. I was hoping, if it isn't too much trouble, to get a small advance on my paycheck, just to get by until Friday. I wouldn't ask if there was any other way." For a moment, Victoria said nothing. Her face was unreadable, as still as the surface of a pond a second before a thrown stone shatters it. Do you think Laura was right to ask, or should she have found another way? Let us know what you think in the comments. The silence after Laura's words lingered a beat longer than it should have, long enough for Laura's heart to drop. Then Victoria laughed, not a warm laugh, not the kind shared between friends. A short, sharp, incredulous sound, the kind you make when someone says something so ridiculous. It doesn't even deserve a real reaction. "Are you asking me for money?" Victoria said loudly enough for the nearest guest to turn around. "At my engagement luncheon?" "Forgive me, ma'am, Do you have any idea how this looks, how this sounds?" Victoria's voice rose, and Laura felt the heat rise to her face as a few more heads turned. I have a catering team to manage and 28 guests arriving in an hour. And you stand here begging me for a handout like I run a charity foundation. It's not a handout, Laura said more quietly, trying to keep the situation from escalating. It's my own paycheck, ma'am, just ahead of schedule. My boy. I don't care about your boy. The words came out flat, fast, and careless, with that cruelty that isn't even planned but simply flies out of a person who has never considered the weight of their own words. Now is neither the time nor the place. Something closed up in Laura's chest, something that a moment ago had still been open. She nodded, muttered an apology, and reached for the tray she had set down, wanting only one thing: to disappear back into the kitchen, right where she belonged, invisible and grateful. But across the room, unnoticed by either woman in the heat of the moment, Maxwell Sinclair stood frozen. He had been chatting with an old business partner when he caught the end of the conversation. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to see Laura's shoulders collapse inward. Enough to see the flush of shame creeping up her neck. Enough to recognize the posture of a person trying to make themselves smaller so the moment would end faster. He excused himself and began making his way across the veranda, weaving through groups of guests, clenching his jaw tighter with every step. He didn't make it in time. Because just as Laura turned to leave, Danny's face flashed before her eyes, his quiet voice that morning. "Will we have breakfast today?" And something inside her broke free from its cautious cage. She turned back around. "Please," she said. And this time her voice cracked open, raw and unguarded. "This isn't for me. My son is hungry. He is 5 years old and he hasn't had a proper meal in 2 days. And I'm begging you, not to embarrass you, but because I have nowhere else to turn. I have worked in this house for 8 years. My mother worked here for 15. My grandmother started 35 years ago this spring. I've never asked this family for anything I haven't earned. I'm asking now because my child is starving, and there is no shame greater than that. None." The veranda grew so quiet that her words reached every corner. For one long second, something akin to understanding flashed across Victoria's face. A tiny, fleeting crack of humanity. Later, some of the guests would say they noticed it too. A flash that could have grown into an apology, given the chance. The chance never came. Victoria's hand moved before her conscious mind seemed to catch up. A sharp slap across Laura's cheek echoed off the marble floor and the high ceiling, off the crystal glasses and the guests frozen in silence. Laura's head snapped to the side. Her hand flew to her cheek. A gasp rippled through the room. Someone's champagne glass shattered on the floor, slipping from a trembling hand. And at that exact moment, Maxwell Sinclair reached the edge of the gathered crowd, close enough to see the red mark already blooming on Laura's face. Close enough to hear Victoria's voice, cold and clipped, already justifying herself. "She had no right speaking to me like that in front of my guests. Someone needs to teach these people." Enough. The word came out of Maxwell like a slamming door, low and final. The room, which had been buzzing with shock, fell completely silent. Maxwell didn't look at Victoria first. He looked at Laura. He watched how she stood, one hand still pressed to her cheek, eyes cast down, shoulders tense as if expecting another blow. Not from Victoria, but from him, from the house, from the world that never gave a woman like her the benefit of the doubt. "Laura," he said, and his voice was softer than anyone in that room had ever heard from him. "Are you all right?" She looked up, stunned. In 8 years of service, Maxwell Sinclair had never once asked her that question in front of other people. Staff were meant to be seen, but not in the spotlight. Yet here he was, 28 years old, the master of the house, focusing all his attention on someone everyone else had been trained to ignore. "I am fine, sir," Laura whispered, though her voice shook. "I shouldn't have—" "You did nothing wrong." He said it plainly, firmly, loudly enough for the whole room to hear. Then he slowly turned to Victoria. The expression on his face was one the guests had never seen before. Not exactly anger, but something colder and more unyielding than anger. Something like a man recalculating everything he thought he knew. Victoria opened her mouth. "Maxwell, you don't understand." She came up to me and demanded. I heard what she said. His voice was level, but steel rang beneath it. I heard every word. The guests around them fell utterly silent. The kind of silence that falls right before something in a room changes forever. Have you ever seen someone's true character revealed in an instant, the way Victoria just did? Let us know in the comments. And then everything changed in an instant. Maxwell stood like that for what seemed like an eternity, though only a few seconds had passed. His gaze darted between Victoria's flushed, defensive face and Laura's trembling hand still pressed to her reddened cheek. 28 guests were frozen around them, champagne glasses forgotten, conversations caught in throats. Somewhere in the back, the string quartet hired for the occasion stumbled on a half note and fell completely silent. The silence in the room was too heavy for music. He remembered his father, who had built this house into a massive empire, but never once raised his voice at the people who kept it running. He remembered his mother saying, "You could learn everything about a person just by watching how they treat someone who can do nothing for them in return." He remembered Agatha Barnes, Laura's grandmother, who had worked in this very house for 21 years before he was even born. She had once sat with him for a whole hour when he was 4 years old and terrified of a thunderstorm, humming an old tune until he fell asleep because his own parents were at some reception much like this one. 35 years his family had relied on the quiet, loyal backbone of the Barnes women. And in one careless moment, Victoria had just shown him what those 35 years were worth in her eyes. "You hit her," he finally said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the veranda. "In my house, in front of my guests, because she asked a question you didn't like. Maxwell, please, you're making this into something it's not." "I'm making it exactly what it is." He stepped closer, close enough that only she could see the depth of what had shifted behind his eyes. "This woman's family has served this house for 35 years. Her grandmother sat with me when I was a child, and my own parents couldn't find the time. Her mother nursed my father through his final illness with more patience and love than half the people in this room have ever shown anyone. And Laura herself has given 8 years of loyal, quiet service to this family, never once asking for anything beyond what she earned. Until today, when her son was starving, and she found the courage to ask anyway." Victoria's face paled, confidence drained from it in real time, as she began to realize, perhaps for the first time, the true weight of what she had done. "I didn't know about her family. I didn't know—" "That's not the point, Victoria." Maxwell's voice snapped like a whip, sharp enough that several guests flinched. "The point is that a human being told you her child hadn't eaten in 2 days, and your response was to hit her in the face in front of 28 people. It's not about who her family is. It's about who you are." The room became so quiet that Laura could hear her own heart pounding in her ears. She wanted to disappear. She wished the marble floor would open up and swallow her, just so she wouldn't have to stand at the center of this collapse. This wasn't what she wanted. She didn't want to cost this man his engagement, his happiness, his carefully constructed future. She opened her mouth to speak, to smooth things over, to shrink back down to that invisible size the world expected of her. But Maxwell wasn't finished, and something in his face told her that trying to stop him now was like trying to stop a wave already breaking on the shore. He squared his shoulders, looked around the stunned faces of his guests, his business partners, the wealthiest families in the state, people whose opinions he had carefully cultivated for years. And then he did the thing that would be the talk of the county for a month to come. He raised his hand and pointed to the front door. "I want you to leave my house," he told Victoria. "Right now." A collective gasp rippled across the veranda. Someone's glass slipped from their fingers and shattered unnoticed on the floor. Maxwell. Victoria's voice went thin, incredulous. You can't be serious. Our engagement, our wedding is in 2 months. Everyone we know is standing right here. I am completely serious. His voice didn't waver, didn't soften, left no room for negotiation. I built this life on the backs of people this family has never properly thanked. I will not marry a woman who believes that striking one of them across the face is an acceptable response to a mother's desperation. It's not about the scene, Victoria. It's about who you are when you think no one important enough is watching. Well, today everyone important enough was watching. You are humiliating me in front of everyone I know. You humiliated yourself, Maxwell said. And for the first time, his voice faltered. Not from anger now, but from something closer to grief. The grief of a man realizing he had almost built his entire future on a foundation he didn't truly understand. I merely made sure everyone saw it clearly. Victoria stood frozen for a long moment. Her mouth opened and closed, as if searching for words powerful enough to undo what had just happened. There were none. Slowly, the color left her cheeks, giving way to something colder. Humiliation rapidly curdled into rage. You will regret this, she said quietly enough that only the closest people could hear. Everyone will know how you disgraced me over some maid. Some maid? Maxwell repeated, and deliberately turned to look at Laura, who was still standing motionless by the window, one hand pressed to her cheek, tears now streaming silently down her face. Not from the slap, but from the impossible, dizzying reversal of everything this day was supposed to be. Her name is Laura Barnes, and she has more dignity in her little finger than you've shown in the 6 months I've known you. Victoria's face contorted, not with remorse, but with a cold, wounded pride. She scanned the guests, looking for allies, for a shred of sympathy from anyone who might take her side. No one did. She spun on her heels, the pale blue dress swirled around her ankles, and she walked off the veranda without another word. The click of her heels on the marble was the only sound in the hushed room until the front door slammed somewhere in the distance. For a long time after she left, no one spoke. No one moved. The engagement luncheon Maxwell Sinclair had planned for weeks had just imploded in front of the very people it was intended for. He turned back to Laura, and for the first time all day, his voice became almost unbearably gentle. I'm so sorry, he said. I'm sorry it came to this. I'm sorry you had to stand here and beg for something that should have been yours, without question. Laura shook her head, tears still flowing freely. Sir, I never wanted anything like this. I know, he said. I know you didn't. What would you have done in Laura's place? Tell us honestly in the comments. That evening, Laura stood at her kitchen sink, watching the soap bubbles slide down a plate she had already washed twice. Her thoughts were too tangled to notice her hands had stopped moving in the cooling water. Danny was finally asleep in the next room, with a full stomach for the first time in days. Before she left the estate that evening, Maxwell had insisted she be sent home with 2 full bags of groceries and an envelope that, when she opened it privately in the hallway, made her hands shake so much she almost dropped it. Much more than an advance, much more honestly than she felt she deserved simply for telling the truth about her and her son's hunger. But it wasn't the money keeping her awake that night. Looking at her reflection in the dark kitchen window, she knew it was guilt. She had cost a good man his engagement. However cruel Victoria was beneath that polished facade, Maxwell had chosen her, planned a wedding around her, built 2 months of hope with her at the center, and in one desperate moment born of hunger and fear, Laura had destroyed it all in front of 28 witnesses. She remembered her grandmother, Agatha, who always said the Barnes women don't make waves in that house. We do our work, child, and let the Sinclair family live their lives. That's how a family like ours survives 35 years in a place like that. Laura had broken that unspoken rule today, And even though Maxwell had met it with nothing but kindness, she couldn't shake the fear that she had broken something else too. Some fragile, invisible balance that had kept her family safe and employed for 2 generations. She barely slept that night. When morning came, she got dressed for work with a knot in her stomach, certain that today everything would finally fall apart. Surely someone in the family, a cousin, a board member, or an advisor, would insist she be quietly and neatly let go, as is usually done. A scandal is a scandal, and someone always has to pay for it. Rarely is it the wealthy person at the center of events. She arrived at the estate and found the house strangely quiet. The staff moved about their morning duties, speaking in hushed, careful voices, clearly still processing what had happened the day before. Keeping her head down, she walked straight to the kitchen and had barely tied her apron when one of the housekeepers, an older woman named Mary Patterson, who had worked there almost as long as Laura, appeared in the doorway with an unreadable expression. "Mr. Sinclair wants to see you," Mary said. "In the study." Laura's stomach dropped straight through the floor. She walked down the long corridor toward his study with that specific, hollow dread of a person walking toward a sentence they believe has already been passed. She knocked softly, and his voice, as calm as ever, told her to come in. Maxwell was standing by the window with his back to her, looking out at the gardens his family had cultivated for generations. He turned around when he heard the door click shut. "Please, have a seat," he said, pointing to the armchair opposite his desk. She sat down, clasping her hands tightly in her lap, bracing herself for anything. "I imagine you spent the whole night worrying that I was going to fire you," he said, and there was something almost sad in the way he said it, as if the assumption itself bothered him more than anything else. "I wouldn't blame you, sir," she said quietly. "I caused you a lot of trouble." "You told the truth," he said, "to your own detriment in the hardest of circumstances, because your son was hungry. If anything in this house is going to change because of yesterday, it certainly won't be your job." She looked up at him uncertainly. "I was thinking all night," he continued, moving to sit on the edge of the desk rather than behind it, a small gesture that suddenly made the study feel less like an office and more like a place where 2 people were just having a conversation. "About how long your family has given everything to this house, quietly, faithfully, without a single complaint, and how little this family, my family, truly saw you for it. My father paid well. I tried to do the same, but paying someone fairly and truly seeing them as a whole person with their own life and struggles outside these walls are 2 very different things. Yesterday, I realized how much I had failed at the second." "You don't owe me anything beyond what you've already given," Laura said, though her voice shook. "I disagree." He reached for a folder on the desk and placed it in front of her. "I spoke with my accountant this morning. From this moment on, your pay is being revised, not as an advance, not as charity, but as fair, long overdue compensation for 8 years of service, for quietly keeping this house afloat while being paid far less than it was worth. We are also setting up a fund in your grandmother's name for unexpected staff needs, groceries, medical bills, anything that can't wait until payday. No one in this house should ever have to stand in a room and beg to feed their child again." Laura looked at the folder, then at him, unable to find words solid enough to speak. "There is one more thing," Maxwell added more quietly. "Danny, from what I understand, he's a bright boy, loves dinosaurs, drawing, things like that." She nodded, her throat tightening. "There's a scholarship program at the local elite preparatory academy. My family has quietly funded it for years, but never really utilized it for the families who actually work in this house. I would like Danny to be considered for it if you have no objections." Tears welled up before she could stop them, and this time, they weren't born of fear or exhaustion, but of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time, a strange, overwhelming relief of simply being seen. "Why?" she managed to ask. "Why now, after all this?" Maxwell paused, looking down at his own hands. "Because yesterday, watching Victoria strike you, I realized something about myself that I didn't like. I built a life around convenience and comfort, and never once asked myself if the foundation beneath that comfort was fair. You forced me to ask that question, Laura. I owe you for that, not the other way around. Have you ever had to make such a difficult choice between staying silent and speaking a truth that could cost you everything? Share your story in the comments. 2 months later, on a warm Saturday afternoon, Laura stood at the edge of the same veranda where everything had changed, holding Danny's hand and watching the sunlight pour gold across the marble floor. The room looked different now, not because anything had been rebuilt or redecorated, but because the air inside it felt different, somehow lighter, the way a house feels when something honest has finally happened within its walls. She had come at Maxwell's personal invitation to celebrate the 35th anniversary of her family's service at the Sinclair estate, a small gathering that he had insisted on. Not a grand reception like the one that had ended so badly months prior, but something quieter and more real. The current household staff was present, along with 2 of her cousins and her elderly aunt, who had once worked as a cook in this very kitchen decades ago. Maxwell stood by the same window where Victoria had once stood with her champagne glass, though now a photograph hung in that spot. An old sepia-toned picture of Agatha Barnes on the day she first started working at the Sinclair estate 35 years ago, almost to the day. She would have loved this, Maxwell said, walking up to Laura as she peered at the young, unwrinkled face of her grandmother in the photo. I only caught a few glimpses of her before she passed, but I remember her clearly. She had a way of making a room feel less cold just by being in it. She used to say the same thing about kindness, Laura said softly, that it costs nothing to give and changes everything for the person who receives it. Danny tugged at his mother's hand, holding up a folder stuffed with drawings. Mostly dinosaurs, but also a rough, painstaking sketch of the estate itself, with 5 tiny stick figures standing in front of it, labeled in careful, childish handwriting. Great-grandma, grandma, mom, me, and Mr. Sinclair. Maxwell knelt down to Danny's eye level, studying the drawing intensely. This is really great, Danny. You have real talent. I'm going to be an architect, Danny declared, with the total, unshakable confidence that only a 5-year-old possesses. I'm going to build houses where nobody is ever hungry. Something softened in Maxwell's face, unguarded and gentle. I have no doubt that you will. Later, as the small gathering began to wind down and the guests started to say their goodbyes, Laura found herself by the window again. The warm afternoon light fell on the same floor where she had once stood, trembling, anticipating a slap she hadn't seen coming, and a truth she hadn't expected to say out loud. She thought about how close she had come to staying silent that day, swallowing her hunger and her son's hunger, just as her family always had. How 3 generations of Barnes women had learned to do just that in order to survive in houses like this. She thought about how the world had taught her time and time again that women like her should be quiet, grateful, invisible, and how, in one desperate moment, she had refused to be any of those things, and it had cost her a bruised cheek, but given back something she hadn't realized she'd lost. Her voice. Maxwell appeared beside her again, holding 2 mugs of tea, offering one to her. I never properly thanked you, he said, for that day. You've thanked me enough, sir. More than enough. Not for the money, he said, slowly shaking his head. For the truth. I built a whole life on assumptions I never once questioned. That everything is fine because it looks fine. That people are content because they aren't complaining. You taught me that silence isn't the same as peace. Sometimes it's just fear wearing a straight face. Laura smiled, a small, genuine smile showcasing the gap in her teeth that she hadn't used in longer than she could remember. My grandmother used to say something similar. She said the bravest thing a quiet person can do is finally speak up. They stood together in a comfortable silence, watching Danny run across the lawn outside, laughing and chasing one of the estate dogs in wide, joyful circles. His laughter rang clear and bright through the open doors. 35 years ago, Agatha Barnes had walked through the back door of this house looking for nothing more than a job to feed her family. She could never have imagined that half a century later, Her granddaughter would be standing in the grand drawing room of that same house, invited rather than summoned, seen rather than overlooked. Her son's laughter-filling halls that had once only echoed with quiet, careful footsteps. Some houses take a generation to truly change, but sometimes all it takes is one honest moment, one person brave enough to ask, and one person decent enough to finally listen. Because in the end, that's what it comes down to. Kindness costs nothing, but the lack of it costs everything. And sometimes the true measure of a person isn't how they treat those who can give them something, but how they treat those who can't. To everyone who watched this story all the way to the end, thank you. Laura's story reminds us that dignity is something no one can take from you, no matter how hard the world tries to make you feel small. If there is someone in your life who quietly gives more than they get, maybe today is the day to tell them that you see them too. If this story touched something inside you, just as it touched us while telling it, do us a favor and hit the like button. It really helps the story reach those who need it. And if you are here for the first time, please subscribe to my channel, because we share real, honest stories like this every week. Stories about the quiet strength it takes just to keep moving forward. We'd love to know what part of Laura's story resonated with you the most. Let us know in the comments. We read every single one. And if you know someone who needs a reminder today that their voice matters, send this video to them. Thank you for being with us, and we'll see you in the next story.
Your support is very important to us. Thank you so much. Thank you for watching. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. We would love to know what you think.